QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021 Purchase Order Form or PO. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars practice file. We currently have the home page open. You can open the home page by going to the company dropdown, selecting the home page. We also have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view dropdown, selecting the open windows list, making sure it is not collapsed with this icon here so you can see the open windows. We're now going to be discussing the purchase order. We're not actually going to enter the purchase order here, but we're going to be looking at purchase orders that have been entered. If you want to take a look at us entering purchase orders, we will do that when we go through the practice problem in the second half of the course, so you can jump down there if you so choose. So the purchase order is going to be in the vendor section. The vendor section means we're going to eventually be paying someone, meaning we are buying something, either a good or service for the vendors from a vendor. So the purchase order is going to be the process of us purchasing something, in this case, typically that being inventory. So this purchase order is on this top stream as opposed to this bottom stream. Notice that this entire top stream will not be there if you set up your company as a service company only and not one that is purchasing inventory. So when we do the setup process, as we will do in the second half of the course, when we set up the company file, we set it up as one which is going to be including inventory, and therefore QuickBooks put up top this top stream, which includes icons related to the purchase and flow of that inventory. So the purchase order is going to be a little bit different. So it's strange. Notice that I've been saying every one of these forms is the data form. These are typically data input type of forms, which is going to be the data input for QuickBooks. QuickBooks will use those forms in order to make basically the journal entry in order to affect the financial statements, that being the balance sheet and the income statement or the profit and loss statement. This one's kind of the exception. It is a form. We will be tracking it, but it actually has no journal entry. And let's explain that real quick because it's a little bit different than you might think when you typically buy something. This is going to be the process of us buying something, buying inventory that we expect to sell in the future. If you were to buy something like online, or if I was to buy something online and go to an online retailer such as Amazon or something like that and buy something, then before I get this thing shipped to me, I would have to pay for it at the point in time of purchase in some way, shape, or form. At that point in time, because I paid for it, there would be a financial transaction. I would record that payment at that point. If you're in a business where that is the case, where you're paying for inventory at the point in time that you order it before it is shipped to you, then you're probably not going to be using a purchase order. You will simply have the transaction at the point in time of purchase because the inventory is in essence yours at that point in time, because that's basically the deal at that point. You've already made a payment. But over here, if you have more power on the purchasing side, if you're a larger company, then sometimes you can influence the vendor enough to be able to say, in our case, we're buying guitars. I would like to purchase this many guitars from you, and I would like you to ship me those guitars. And then once I get them, I will count them. I will check that it agrees to the amount that we asked for. If it does, then we will pay you. So that's a little bit different. So now we're not going to actually pay until we get the guitars or the inventory, which is the guitars. In our case, that's what the purchase order is basically doing. It's a request, but no financial transaction has happened. We don't have the inventory. It's not ours because we haven't paid for it and we don't have possession of it. And we didn't make a payment for it. We just made a request. So we're not going to actually enter anything to the financials here. But we do want to track this because when we then receive the inventory, which is going to be the next step here, the inventory, I didn't mean to open that, will most likely have a bill attached to it. So we will, in essence, record this transaction, which is basically going to be a bill. Usually inventory, we're imagining we get a box of 20 guitars or whatever with a bill in it. And we would enter the bill at that time, and then we would pay the bill. So that's going to be the process that we would have. So let's take a look at a purchase order. We're not going to enter one. We'll just take a look at them, take a look at some of the ones that were entered prior. You could do that by going into the purchase order and then using the back arrow, and we could take a look at the format of the purchase order. So this one is our vendor here. Once again, we're buying from somebody. We're not buying it yet, but we're making a request. So that means we're purchasing from a vendor. We can create the vendor if it's not already in there as we make the purchase order, or we can create the vendor in the vendor center as we saw in the past. If we tab through this, we got the drop ship to is not impacted on this purchase order. The template is going to be the template that we're going to be using for the purchase order, so you can customize the templates if you so choose. We have the date of the purchase order. The purchase order will typically be automatically numbered by the QuickBooks system. And then we're going to say the vendor is Fender. Notice there's no address input here because we didn't put all the detail for vendor in terms of the address. If you're doing a purchase order for someone that you're dealing with a lot, then you probably want the more detailed information from them. The shipping address is going to be included in the data when we started up the system for our company address. And then we have the item. Now, the item is going to be something that we're going to set up in our item list. We'll talk about that later. This is one of the more confusing things to do when setting up the QuickBooks system. However, if the QuickBooks system is already set up and you are now working within it, the items should already be set up, making the data input for something like a purchase order much easier. The setup process of the items can be the difficult component. Now, this item that's set up are inventory items. We're purchasing inventory. So we had to set up the item. We'll talk about that later. And that was a kind of guitar that we're buying. So we bought a Squier guitar. We set up that item. That item then included the description of the guitar. And then we had to input the quantity here. We're going to buy 20 of them. The rate was included with the item, so it populated automatically if we set up the item properly. And then this is an optional field. Like we might, obviously we're buying from our vendor here, Fender. We're buying guitars that we're going to resell. We're buying inventory. Fender, the vendor, doesn't care about the customer that we're selling the guitars to. They don't need that information. But if we're buying the guitars for a particular customer, say this customer, for example, came in and said, the New Music Stuff is our customer. The customer that we sell to, not the person we buy from now it's someone that we sell to came in and said, hey, look, I would like 20 guitars from Fender. I would like these Squier guitars. And we say, okay, we don't have those, but we'll order them from Fender for you. And therefore, we go to Fender, we're going to order them, but I want to mark this off in the purchase order, not because Fender, our vendor, cares about it, but because we want to link that then to the customer side of things, the invoice that we'll create later. So in other words, if we're buying this inventory for no one in particular, no customer in particular, this will be blank. If we're going to buy it specifically for a request from a customer, we will put in the customer, not for the sake of the vendor, but for the sake of ourselves so that we can then process the invoice for it later. And then we have the amount down here. So once again, this transaction is not going to have any kind of journal entry, but we are going to use the purchase order to track what we get when we get the actual inventory, to track that we got it properly and it's in time and all that kind of stuff. If we go to the prior one, we'll look very similar. We got Gibson. This is another vendor that we have. We're ordering guitars. The item has already been set up for it. We're ordering 10 guitars. We would expect to receive them in the future. No effect on the financial statements, no effect on any financial account. If we go to this one, Epiphones, another vendor. We're ordering guitars once again, this time being an Epiphone Les Paul. We're ordered and set up. It's being ordered and set up by the items that are being here. You can see that we have received these by the little icon here that says we have received these items. So if I close these out then, what we'll then expect to happen is we will receive these items, and then we can go here and enter the receipt of the items, which would be on this side of things. And typically that would be basically entering a bill usually that we have received them. And then oftentimes we will be paying the bill. Once we enter the bill here, we could use the bill payment form. It's going to be the same kind of thing. But they want to go on in this flow chart, right? Once we have the bill, then we can pay it. It'll sort it in here with all our other bills when we decide to pay the bills. After that point in time, it'll be back to our kind of normal process to then sort the bill when it will be paid and then pay off the bill. Now, because there's no transaction related to this on the financial statements, we can't really track this on the financials or some other, the reports aren't the best place to kind of sort these. We can kind of look at them. We can go into the PO and look at them here, but the best place to go is really the vendor center to see the purchase order. So I can go to the vendor center, vendors drop down, and then the vendor center. And typically we have our vendors to the left. Now the purchase orders that are outstanding, we can go to the vendor over here and look at the purchase order and see the process of the purchase order. But another place we can go for the open purchase orders is the transactions. So this is a really nice place to be if you have the purchase orders being in process. Then you can check off the purchase order up top, and then you'll have a list of the purchase orders on the right-hand side, and you can order these purchase orders by open purchase orders. We don't have any open at this time, and then the closed purchase orders that we have here. So this is a place that you can kind of track where the open purchase orders would be. Good place to go to track those. Again, once we have the purchase order, we'll basically go here, and we're going to imagine we would receive like those 20 guitars. We imagine we receive them in our shipping area. We've got 20 guitars in a box. We opened them up with a bill. Then we would enter the bill. And so if I opened up the bill and I go back to one that's a guitar, like here's Fender. So we basically populated this bill with the purchase order. We populated it with the purchase order. We got these 20 guitars. Now we entered the bill. Bill means that accounts payable is increasing. We're recording the transaction at that point in time. The other side of it, in this case, going to inventory because we have an inventory item. We also used this billable item here saying, hey, look, I want to link this and to the invoice. I want this to help me out to create the invoice on the customer side of things, because the only reason we bought these 20 guitars was to sell them then to New Music Stuff, our customer. So then if I close this back out, then of course we would pay the bill, which we can sort and pay them with the pay bill item as we saw in a prior presentation. And then we can jump down to the customer side of things at that point in time and say, hey, look, I had a purchase order that I purchased just for you. We have received it. It's now here. And now this would help us to populate the invoice, which would be on the customer side of things. We'll talk about later, to bill our clients. So remember, this is kind of like a bill to the clients, but a bill that we're sending out on our side of the transaction for QuickBooks is an invoice. Invoice means the bill that we send out to the customers. Bill means an invoice or bill that is coming to us. So that directionality is important to kind of mull over in your mind. So if I go back, we have Anderson. Here's a guitar that was purchased that might have started with a purchase order. And where was that music stuff store that we had? Jill. And these are all, this one is New Music Stuff. Here's those 20 Squire. So this was populated basically from that billable item that we had that was populated from the purchase order. So we'll see all that connection as we actually enter this information into the QuickBooks in the second half of the course in our practice problem section of the course. Once again, no effect on the financial statements, so we won't open the financial statements for the purchase order.